All right, welcome to your deep dive. You've given us quite the variety pack today, huh? Tech, social trends, even some breaking news. It seems like you really want to see how it all connects, how these different areas are all kind of, well, playing out right now.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's not just the topics themselves, but the sources too, right? I mean, we've got news articles, corporate updates, even some social media posts. It's like a real-time snapshot of this moment in time.
Exactly. Okay, so where do we even begin with all of this? Well, this whole TikTok situation seems like a good place to start, don't you think? I mean, both Reuters and the Washington Post are saying it could be lights out for TikTok in the U.S. as early as Sunday. Unless, of course, President-elect Trump steps in. Gosh, can you even imagine, what is it, 170 million American users? Just like that, poof, no more TikTok.
It's it's wild, isn't it? Talk about a massive shakeup in the social media world. And of course, the big question is, well, where do all those users go? And it's funny because CNN is reporting that a lot of them are already jumping ship to, get this, another Chinese app. Xiaohongshu, it's called. Though most US users are calling it Red Note. I mean, it's already climbing the App Store charts, like topping them.
So it's not just about, like, ditching Chinese apps altogether.
Yeah.
It seems like American users are, like, specifically drawn to this type of platform. Huh.
Right. It's like they need that specific kind of experience, whatever that is. It's not just about, finding a TikTok replacement. It's got to be something more specific than that, right?
Yeah. It's also leading to some pretty interesting cultural exchanges too. I've even seen some posts where American users are like straight up asking for help, like how to use RedNote. It's like they're entering this whole new digital culture, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And it's all because of this geopolitical event, basically. Crazy how technology can be a bridge like that, right? Connecting people across cultures, especially when things are, well, a little tense in the real world.
Definitely makes you think. I mean, the internet, it definitely doesn't always play by the same rules as the real world, that's for sure. But speaking of, well, maybe not rule breaking exactly, but have you seen all this talk about enshittification? Creative Block and CNN both have articles about it. Basically, this idea that companies, especially these social media giants, are, well, they're putting profits over user experience.
Yeah, and they're using Facebook as like Exhibit A. I mean, yikes, right? Removing fact checkers, messing with their hate speech policies, and Zuckerberg's whole push for AI generated users. I mean, it's kind of scary, isn't it? Like, are they even trying to make their platform a good place to be anymore?
Right. It's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to keep users engaged and, keep those advertisers happy. But it kind of feels like in the end, the users are the ones getting the short end of the stick.
Absolutely. And that's the big question, right? What happens when these platforms, the ones we rely on for, connection for information, when they become, well, less reliable, less fun to use? Where do we go from there?
Hmm. Makes you think. I mean, maybe this whole red note thing, maybe it's a sign that people are like actively looking for something better, something that hasn't gone down that same path.
Maybe, maybe. And speaking of exploring new frontiers, we've got to talk about what's happening in space. I mean,
Yeah.
Blue Origin, they made some serious waves with their new Glenn rocket,
Yeah.
sending that Blue Ring Pathfinder payload into orbit.
Yeah, huge milestone. Although they didn't quite stick the landing, so to speak. Lost the booster, but hey, they're going to try again this spring. Well, got to try again, right?
Exactly. It's all about pushing boundaries, even when it gets tough. I mean, space exploration, it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. You're going to have setbacks, but it's that persistence that makes it all worthwhile.
Right on. And meanwhile, NASA, they're making some pretty incredible strides with their lunar program. They just launched, get this, ten different science and tech experiments to the moon, all on that Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost Mission 1 lander.
10. That's amazing. And
Yeah.
these experiments are going to collect all sorts of data, on the moon's thermal properties, radiation levels, even how dust accumulates. It's all about paving the way for future human exploration.
Pretty wild to think about, huh? Sending 10 separate experiments to the moon, all on one little lander. Technology it's really something else.
It really is. And speaking of tech, that's, well, kind of blowing everyone's minds. You can't forget about AI. OpenAI just launched ChatGPT tasks, which, believe it or not, lets users automate basically everyday tasks using the chatbot. I mean, I even heard about people using it to track stock prices.
Wow. So we're basically getting closer and closer to having these AI agents that can like do things on their own. I mean, it's pretty amazing, but also a little bit, I don't know, unnerving.
I know what you mean. It makes you wonder, right? If people are trusting AI with their their money, their stock portfolios. I mean, what's next? What other tasks are we going to be handing over to these systems in the future?
It's a good question, a really good question. But switching gears a bit, there's another development in the tech world that's, well, maybe not everyone is thrilled about. Matthew Ball, he's a market analyst, and he's predicting that Grand Theft Auto's a sixth, GTA ZI, it could launch with a price tag of, get this, $80 or even $100.
Wow. That's a big jump. I mean, we're so used to that $70 price point for, the big AAA games. So this would be a game changer for sure. Of course, the question is, are gamers actually willing to pay that much for a single game?
Especially with, free-to-play games like Fortnite being so huge.
Uh-huh.
It'll be interesting to see how people react,
Yeah,
and if other game companies follow suit.
absolutely. And speaking of things that could, well, shake things up a bit, let's talk about some real-world troubles. Those wildfires in Los Angeles, they're absolutely devastating. 538 has a whole analysis on it. I mean, we're talking loss of life, homes destroyed, and the economic cost. It could be record-breaking.
And it's really hard to ignore the elephant in the room here,
Yeah.
right? Climate change. So many experts and polls are linking it to these increasingly intense wildfires. It's a pretty stark reminder that what we do today has real consequences. And we got to start taking climate change seriously, like now.
Absolutely. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in all this tech and social media stuff, but we can't lose sight of what's happening in the real world. And these wildfires, they're a wake-up call for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. It's definitely a sobering thought. Makes you realize that even with all this incredible progress, all this amazing technology, we've still got some very real challenges to face.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of challenges, there's this story that really highlights how what we do online can have real-world consequences. Outkick, they're reporting on this Eagles fan who got fired from his job. Why? Well, because of a rant he went on, directed at a female Packers fan. And of course, it went viral.
Yeah, and it's easy to forget sometimes that there's like a real person on the other side of the screen, right?
Yeah.
And what we say, what we do online, it can have a real impact on people's lives.
For sure. And it raises some interesting questions too about, the role of social media. I mean, is this accountability or is it just public shaming gone too far?
It's tough to say, really. I mean,
Yeah.
we want people to be responsible for their actions, of course.
Yeah.
But do we want to live in a world where everyone's like constantly afraid of being canceled for one mistake?
Yeah. It's a tricky balance, that's for sure. And something we'll have to figure out as our lives become more and more intertwined with the digital world. But hey, not all digital stories are doom and gloom, right? Remember that NPR article about these apps that people are using to fight loneliness?
Oh, yeah. Those were fascinating. I mean, there are apps for older adults to make friends, apps for organizing dinners with complete strangers, even apps to set up, like doggy play dates.
Yeah.
So creative.
Right. It really shows you that even in this digital world, this need for connection, for human interaction, it's still there. It's fundamental, and it's great to see how technology can help with that,
It's like the opposite of that whole enshittification thing we were talking about, right? Like some platforms are becoming less and less user-friendly, but then you have these other platforms popping up that are like specifically designed to address these unmet needs and build communities.
Exactly. It's like this constant evolution, this push and pull between those who prioritize profits and those who prioritize people. It's fascinating.
It really is. Makes you wonder which side will win out in the end.
That's the big question, isn't it? Anyway, we've got a few more stories to get through, each with its own unique take on the world we're living in.
Yeah, for sure. Before we move on, though, there were a couple of stories that, I don't know, they really jumped out at me.
Oh, okay. I'm curious. Which ones caught your eye?
Well, we've been talking about, social media, space exploration, even these devastating wildfires. But sometimes it's those smaller, those everyday stories that really show how all this stuff affects people.
Yeah, totally. Those smaller stories can be surprisingly relatable sometimes. What did you have in mind? Well, for one, that article from The Guardian about the iPhone alarm glitch. Apparently, it's been going on for months now, and people are, actually losing their jobs because their alarms aren't going off, or they're going off but silently.
Oh, man, that's rough. Can you imagine having to explain that to your boss? Sorry, I'm late. My phone overslept.
Right. It's kind of funny, but also, really frustrating. It just goes to show how much we rely on technology for everything these days, even the most basic things. And when those things go wrong, even in a small way, it can really mess things up.
It makes you wonder, too, about the power these tech companies have, right? I mean, Apple's known about this glitch for months, and they still haven't fixed it. It's a
Yeah.
little bit concerning, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of accountability, let's circle back to that Eagles fan who got fired for that rant. It brings up an interesting point about, online behavior and consequences. I mean, it used to be that what happened in the stands stayed in the stands. Now, with everyone having a smartphone and social media and all that, everything's like documented and instantly shared. So, yeah, actions have consequences.
It's true. It's like we're all under a microscope now, which I guess can be a good thing, right? It can hold people accountable,
Yeah.
but it can also lead to like a culture of public shaming, this whole online mob mentality.
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line?
Good question. It's a tough one. I mean, we want people to be responsible, but we also don't want to live in a world where everyone's terrified of being, canceled for making one mistake. It's a delicate balance for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's something we're all going to have to figure out as we move further into this digital age, right?
Yeah.
But not all digital stuff is bad. I mean, remember those loneliness apps we were talking about?
Oh, yeah, those are fascinating. All those different approaches, right? Apps for older adults to connect, apps for setting up dinner with random people, even apps for like dog play dates.
It's so creative. It really shows you that even in this digital world, people, they still crave connection,
Yeah.
that human interaction. It's just part of who we are. And it's pretty cool to see how technology can facilitate that.
Definitely. It's almost like a counterpoint to that whole enshittification thing, right? Some platforms are getting worse, but then you have these others that are specifically designed to address those needs, to build communities.
Exactly. It's like this constant back and forth, between those who are all about the bottom line and those who are more focused on the human side of things.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder which one will ultimately shape the future of the internet.
It's a good question. A really good question. And
Mhm.
speaking of questions, remember that story about Brad Pitt and that French woman who got scammed?
Oh yeah, that was crazy. Someone used AI to impersonate him, right? And she ended up losing like hundreds of thousands of euros.
Yeah, it's a scary example of how AI can be used for bad stuff. It just shows that we got to be careful out there, especially when it comes to, money and online transactions.
It's true. Not everything is what it seems online. And as AI gets more and more advanced, well, we've got to be even more careful, Brand.
Absolutely. And speaking of being careful, remember that news about the SEC and Elon Musk? Apparently, they're suing him for not disclosing a big Twitter stock purchase back in 2022. They're saying he basically cheated investors out of millions by manipulating the stock price.
Yeah, in this case, it has some pretty interesting political angles too. The Biden administration, they've been pretty critical of Musk, but they're on their way out. And the Trump administration, well, they seem to be a lot more sympathetic to Musk.
Yeah, that's a big shift, and it could have a big impact on how this whole lawsuit plays out.
Especially since Trump just named Musk to head up that new government department, the one focused on efficiency and deregulation.
Hmm.
It's a pretty big vote of confidence. It makes you wonder if Musk will actually face any real consequences for all this.
We'll have to wait and see, I guess. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on. I mean, the outcome of this case could have a big impact on a lot of things like, financial regulations, oversight of the tech industry, even the balance of power between the government and corporations.
It's a reminder that all this stuff, tech, finance, politics, it's all connected. And the decisions made in one area can have a ripple effect across all the others.
Uh,
But even with all that big picture stuff, I keep coming back to those smaller stories, the ones that show how all this is playing out in people's everyday lives.
yeah, I get it. Those stories can be really powerful.
They are. Like, remember that story about the Eagles fan who was just like casually reading a book on the sidelines during the game?
Oh yeah, it was kind of a nice change of pace, wasn't it? Amidst all that chaos and intensity, there he was, just chilling with a book.
It was a good reminder that not everyone is, glued to their phone 24/7. Some people
Mm.
still appreciate those simpler things, even during a playoff game.
It's true. It's a good reminder to take a break sometimes, to do things that bring us joy, that help us stay grounded.
Totally agree. And speaking of things that bring us joy, let's go back to those loneliness apps. What stood out to you about them?
What really struck me was how they're using technology to connect people based on shared interests, whether it's, finding friends for older adults or setting up dinners with strangers or even organizing those dog play dates. It's amazing how many different approaches there are.
It's like they're tapping into this universal need for connection, right? It doesn't matter how old you are, where you come from, or even what species you are.
I love that. It really highlights the power of technology to bring people together, to break down barriers.
And it makes you wonder, in a world that can feel so isolating sometimes, are these apps, are they a sign that we're finding new ways to connect? Or are they just a symptom of a bigger problem?
That's a good question. Maybe it's a little bit of both, right? Technology can both contribute to and help solve loneliness. It all depends on how we choose to use it.
Very true. Well said. And speaking of choices and consequences, let's check in on Saif Ali Khan. Thankfully, Pinkville is reporting that he's recovering well from that attack.
That's good to hear. It's a reminder that even those who seem to have it all, they can still be vulnerable.
Yeah. It's a reminder that we all need to be careful, to be aware of our surroundings. But while we're on the topic of well-being, that study on depression, that offers a bit of hope, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Discovering all those new genetic risk factors for depression, that's a huge step forward. It could lead to more effective treatments, more personalized treatments.
And remember how we were talking about how the study included people from all over the world? That's so important for making sure that those treatments are accessible to everyone.
It is mental health. It's a global issue,
Yeah.
right? And we need research and treatments that reflect that.
It's good to see progress being made in an area that's often stigmatized. But, as we're going through all these stories, I'm noticing a theme. It's like there's this underlying tension, this conflict in almost every story.
I see what you mean. It's like we're constantly navigating these contradictions, progress and its downsides, connection and isolation, hope and despair.
Right. It feels like every story has this ethical dilemma at its core.
Hmm.
Like we're living in this state of constant change and we're struggling to deal with the unintended consequences.
You're right. It's a really insightful observation. And it makes me think of another story that kind of embodies that tension. That story about Starbucks reversing their open bathroom policy.
Oh yeah, that was a big one. Remember, they made that change after that incident in Philadelphia. But now it's like they're putting profits ahead of accessibility and inclusivity.
And it's created a lot of controversy. Some people are saying it's discriminatory, that it unfairly targets people who can't afford to buy something every time they need to use the restroom. It's a complicated issue for sure. It touches on corporate responsibility, public access, the role of businesses in providing basic services.
Yeah, there are no easy answers with this one.
Yeah.
And it just shows how tough it is to balance all these different interests and values, as a society.
It does. But amidst all this complexity, all these different perspectives, there's one story that just stands out for its pure drama. You ready to dive into the world of music feuds?
Oh yeah, hit me with it. What's going on?
Well, it involves two of the biggest names in music, actually, Drake and Kendrick Lamar. Drake suing Universal Music Group (UMG) over Kendrick's song, "Not Like Us." But it's not your typical copyright case. It's gotten really messy.
Okay, now I'm really interested. What's the problem?
So Drake is claiming that UMG basically pushed the song, promoted it, even though he says it falsely accuses him of being a pedophile. And he's saying it's led to like threats against him, for his safety. It's a whole thing, It gets into artistic expression, record label responsibility, and even online hate speech.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. It's not just a legal battle. It's like a whole cultural clash with real world implications. Music has always been powerful,
Yeah.
provocative, but this is something else.
Yeah, it really is. It makes you think, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
where's the line between an artist expressing themselves and potentially causing harm? And what responsibility do artists and labels have for the messages they're putting out there?
Big questions, for sure. And it's a reminder that words matter,
Hmm.
especially when they're amplified by social media. But speaking of real-world consequences, let's go back to that Starbucks story, the whole bathroom policy reversal.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? They made that change because of a social justice issue, but now it seems like maybe the bottom line is more important.
Some people are saying it's a step backward,
Yeah.
like it punishes people who can't afford to buy a coffee every time they need to use the restroom.
Yeah.
It raises all these questions about what businesses owe to the public,
Mhm.
and how they should handle these social issues.
It's a tough one. It shows how even policies that seem simple, they can have unintended consequences, ethical implications, and it speaks to a bigger challenge, right? Like how do we balance all these different interests, these values as a society?
Right. It feels like every story we've talked about today, it has this push and pull, progress, but with a cost, connection, but
Yeah.
isolation,
Hmm.
individual actions, but collective responsibility. It's a lot to take in, honestly.
It is, but that's what makes these deep dives so interesting, right? We're not just scratching the surface, we're really digging into these issues, these complexities. We're looking at the big picture.
Exactly. And hopefully, by really engaging with these stories, by asking the tough questions, well, we can all become a little more informed, a little more discerning, a little more, I don't know, ready to deal with this crazy world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about understanding,
Yeah.
right? Understanding the forces that shape our lives, big and small, and remembering that even in a world that's so driven by technology, by algorithms, our choices, our actions, they still matter.
That's a perfect way to put it. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. I hope you found it as eye-opening and thought-provoking as I did. And remember, the conversation doesn't have to end here. Keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep those deep dives going.